So the news has just come out that 30p Lee Anderson has just been suspended from his position from the Conservative Party over anti-Islamic comments he made towards Mayor of London Sadiq Khan. Now, to be honest, ladies and gentlemen, I reckon that, well, Lee Anderson's sort of history of very far-right politics, and even in his place when he was a Labour MP, was very, very questionable. But to be honest, sort of over time, it's become a little bit obvious that it was sort of always going to end with him being disgraced. So almost on the lines of like Lawrence Fox. But what I want sort of people to like understand, probably from the way I see it, this was inevitable. Because guess what? It's the text, it's the old chestnut, ladies and gentlemen, that Lee's past has finally caught up with him. And people are like basically seeing him, and an even larger body of people are seeing him for who he truly is. And I'll just go over the story very quickly. And this is from reported from The Guardian. Lee Anderson has had the Conservative whip suspended after refusing to apologise for remarks about Sadiq Khan on GB News that the London mayor described as Islamophobic, anti-Muslim and racist. The MP for Ashfield's comments on Friday night caused widespread outrage, and Khan accused the former Tory deputy chair on Saturday of pouring fuel on the fire of anti-Muslim hatred. Former Conservative cabinet ministers and the Muslim Council of Britain, the MCB, joined the opposition in lambasting the remarks, leading the chief whip, Simon Hart, to withdraw the whip on Saturday afternoon. Anderson will now sit as an independent. A spokesperson for Hart said, following his refusal to apologise for comments made yesterday, the chief whip has suspended the Conservative whip from Lee Anderson MP. Anderson, who resigned as Tory deputy chair after rebelling against Rishi Sunak's Rwanda policy last month, had told GB News Khan had given our capital city away to his mates. I don't actually believe that the Islamists have got control of our country, but what I do believe is they've got control of Khan, and they've got control of London, he says. Khan condemned Anderson's comments in a Sky News interview on Saturday and said, I am afraid the deafening silence from Rishi Sunak and from the cabinet is them condemning this racism. I am afraid it confirms to many people across the country that there's a hierarchy when it comes to racism. I am unclear why Rishi Sunak, why members of his cabinet aren't calling this out and aren't condemning this. It's like they are complicit in this sort of racism. The message it sends is Muslims are fair game when it comes to racism and anti-Muslim hatred. It's not good enough in 2024 in the United Kingdom. The MCB had earlier called for Anderson to be kicked out of the parliamentary Tory party. It said the MP's comments were disgusting and criticised the silence of the party in the face of such extremism. A spokesperson said, in a week where we learn of an explosion in Islamophobic hate crimes, influential MPs and a donor to the Conservative Party are endorsing coming talks points that peddle conspiracy theories and Islamophobic tropes of alleged Muslims takeovers of the country. The anti-racism campaigners, Hope Not Hate, called on Sunak to expel Anderson from the Conservative Party with immediate effect for stoking the flames of the far right. Senior Tory MPs expressed their disgust at Anderson's remarks, with the former Chancellor Sajid Javid calling them ridiculous. The Business Minister, Nus Ghani, said, I have spoken to Lee Anderson. I've called out Islamic extremism and been attacked by hard left, far right and Islamists. I don't for one moment believe that Sadiq Khan is controlled by Islamists. To say so is both foolish and dangerous. Frankly, this is all so tiring. The Conservatives' peer, Gavin Barwell, who was Theresa May's chief of staff in Number 10, described Anderson's comments as a despicable slur. Neil Garrett, the leader of the Conservatives at City Hall, said he had no shortage of criticisms of Mayor Khan, but that he is not an Islamist. He is not in the pockets of Islamists, and I completely disagree with anyone who says otherwise. The Shadow Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, said Anderson's remarks were a total disgrace. But Anderson's comments are just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to Islamophobia in the Conservative Party. We have seen numerous examples of ignorant and offensive views tolerated and a failure of the party to adopt a definition or even the use of the term Islamophobia. Sunak has a clear choice. Show some backbone and withdraw the whip, or be forever known as the Tory leader who was too weak to stop the far-right rhetoric in his own party. Anderson issued a statement to GB News after being suspended, in which he said, "Following a call with the Chief Whip, I understand the difficult position that I put both he and the Prime Minister in with regard to my comments. I fully accept that they had no option but to suspend the whip in these circumstances. However, I will continue to support the government's efforts to call out extremism in all its forms, be that anti-Semitism or Islamophobia." The Defence Secretary, Grant Shapps, distanced himself from Anderson's remarks on Saturday morning, but stopped short of calling him for to lose the whip. "It's certainly not the way I would put things. I think there are more concerns about the way that some of these pro-Palestinian protests have been taking place, in particular what we saw projected onto Parliament this week, but I certainly wouldn't phrase things like that," he told BBC Breakfast. Anderson is just one MP the Conservatives are facing calls to censure. The former Prime Minister Liz Truss was heavily criticised for using a talk at the Conservative Political Action Conference in the US to claim her efforts to cut taxes were sabotaged by the administrative state and the deep state. She also took part in an interview with Donald Trump's former chief strategist Steve Bannon and remained silent as he hailed the far-right figure Tommy Robinson as a hero. So, what I want people to understand, and this is something very, very important, ladies and gentlemen, about what I said about your past catching up to you, is that because I just before I actually got the camera on, I actually there was a very interesting article that GB News, but they were talking about the initial incident, and it was shared by a woman that I've heard some things about, but I wasn't necessarily sure about sort of where she's. I think she's called Nana Akua, I believe. She's got quite long brunette hair, and she was talking to a political journalist, I believe, called Benjamin Butterworth, a political commentator, and the arguments went back and forth that Nana believed that Lee Anderson was not being racist. Well, unfortunately, whether she thinks so or not, I mean, you may say that technically Lee Anderson wasn't, but unfortunately, in the eyes of quite a lot of other people, and that's the thing as well, that, again, I've mentioned this before, there are some people who are like so high up the tree, so to speak, they think that their word encompasses the whole of the nation. But unfortunately, they don't. I don't need Richie Sunak or Sir Keir Starmer or anybody else to speak on my behalf. I'm more than capable of doing that myself. And since I'm more than capable of doing it myself, I'll just say this. This is what happens, ladies and gentlemen. This is what happens when, you know what, your seditious racism, your propaganda, it is held up to the light. It means that everybody can see it. And what everybody can see is how they're going to judge you. And whether, you know what, and I'm going to say this right now, you know what, I don't think that Labour is entirely this perfect, and whether or not some criticisms labelled against Sadiq Khan in regards to his running of London are entirely up for debate, despite the fact that Sadiq Khan's actually got quite a good track record for votes and winning by substantial margins. But again, I don't live in London. I live basically on the other side of the country. So whether you want to say this is a good reflection on Sadiq's management style is entirely your decision, or more specifically to those who live in London long enough to know how things work. Down in London, I should say. But like I said, because Lee Anderson said this, you know what? I've said this many, many times before. Sometimes in life, there is no such thing as good or bad. There are only consequences. And right here, these are the consequences of Lee Anderson's actions. And whether he likes them or not, whether Nana likes them or not, whether Rishi Sunak likes them or not, whether that chief, that American who praised Tommy Robinson, whether he likes it or not, all our actions have consequences. Even more so because even members of his own party and the MCB were equally unimpressed by Anderson's efforts, and so has Grant Shapps, the defense secretary, and business. You know what? It's clear, ladies and gentlemen, about sort of what's going to start happening. The far right, I mean the really far right, with Lee Anderson probably being sort of the intermediary between the very hard right and just the conservatives as they are, because a lot of them are bordering on rather far in the other direction. They will either all go to the Reform Party, or they'll simply branch off, become independents, and try to sustain themselves on their own, when, unfortunately, again, this is not the early 20th century when the weekly fascist was somehow still in circulation. I'm glad to report the weekly fascist only lasted for about 4 years, and curiously enough was apparently very highly popular when Adolf Hitler became Chancellor of Germany. Make of that what you will, ladies and gentlemen, but I'll just say, there you are, ladies and gentlemen. You reap what you sow, and, well, I certainly hope Lee Anderson thinks he's proud of himself, because I'm not, nor is anybody for that matter. I think it's absurd, ridiculous, and it was, why? What did he even need to say this for? Did Lee really honestly? That's the thing with these people. They really do believe they could just get away with saying whatever they want, and they expect that that's just normal. But unfortunately, it's not. It's very, very abnormal behavior, even from Lee Anderson. That's it. That's the video.